When journalist Wayne Barrett died 3 years ago, he was universally hailed as a legendary investigative reporter for the Village Voice. Over 4 decades, his dogged reporting unearthed hard facts about how the poor and downtrodden of New York were abused by the wealthy and powerful. Eileen Markey is a longtime journalist and an assistant professor of journalism and media studies at Lehman College. She spent the last 3 years sifting through Barrett's work and has assembled a collection of articles that illustrate his craft and tell stories that are worth remembering. Without Compromise, the brave journalism that first exposed Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and the American Epidemic of Corruption is published by Bold Type Books. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be with you.
So why this book and why now?
We really wanted to make Barrett's amazing, really incredibly high standard of investigative reporting available to a new generation of readers. He, as you say, he worked for almost 40 years at the Village Voice. And in the beginning of his career, and then in the very last year of his life, a tremendous amount of that work was focused around Donald Trump. He was the first to report on the mendacious behavior of a young Donald Trump. And in the last year of Barrett's life, which was the year of the electoral campaign, Wayne Barrett was interviewed a whole lot because he had all this great research. And he died the night before the new president was inaugurated. But then, as you said, his writing was referred to constantly. In these past 4 years, his reporting, his foundational reporting, has been referred to in every major piece of investigative journalism about the presidency. But you couldn't read much of it, right? You could read some of the things that were online at The Voice, but the website was spotty and it's not all there. And we really thought that Wayne's reporting was important enough and instructive enough about the value of journalism, about the need for investigative reporting, and just the simple facts that he dug up are something that people should be able to read and frankly hold in their hand and flip through. So we wanted to make this book so that people could have access to this reporting that was referred to so often.
You refer to his reporting about the young Donald Trump, like the story about how that young Donald Trump greased the path towards creating some of his real estate projects by making campaign donations to scads of political candidates and elected officials, and developing personal connections with them, with business people, with their associates, with relatives, even with somebody's bodyguard. The maze of Trump's connections that Wayne was able to ferret out, the minute details about meetings and payoffs and private deals, I found mind-boggling that he was able to unearth all of this stuff. Can you describe the reporting method that he used to allow him to get this kind of information?
He went really wide, right? He wanted to, when he approached a story, he wanted to know absolutely everything that could be known about this figure he was writing about. And in the book, Adam Fifield writes a little bit about this. Adam Fifield's a journalist who co-authored the biography of Rudy Giuliani, Rudy with an exclamation point. And so in this book, and Without Compromise, Adam talks about that method. It was like wanting to swallow the ocean whole, collect every single fact that could possibly be relevant to an investigation. And then in possession of all of them, Barrett believed a pattern would emerge. And he spoke in those terms. We'll get everything we can get, and then we'll have a fact pattern. We'll see A and B and C, and it's the intelligence and the discernment of the reporter who understands enough about how things work and understands enough of the history to see a pattern in those facts, right? And then to be able to turn them into a story to deliver to the readers. But it was, the words we talk about, the words we use when we talk about Wayne are relentless, exhaustive, meticulous, obsessive. And for the many interns that he trained, we were this army that went out to try to get every little piece of, go get the probate on that guy who used to be married to so-and-so, who is a minor official in an administration that hasn't been in office in 10 years, because there might be some fact in there.
A lot of his reporting was document driven, a lot of documents. You talked about the personal interviews he had developed a lot of sources over the years. He would talk to people. And I was amazed by the fact that he didn't have a cell phone. He was one of the last people to get a cell phone. So it shows that you can do a lot of dig up a lot of information without Google, without the internet, without a cell phone. Describe some of the stories, a few of the stories that you decided to include in the book and why you picked them.
Well, so because Wayne's reporting on Donald Trump has been cited so frequently in the last several years, we wanted to put those original documents, right? Like those original pieces in the book so people could read for themselves this thing that everybody's always referring to. So there's 3 pieces there about how Trump emerged and how he used his influence in various administrations. But it's not all Trump. The book by all is certainly not only about the president. There's a section about Rudy Giuliani, who Wayne covered from the early 1980s when Giuliani was a crusading prosecutor in Wayne's mind on the right side of things, on the right side of history. He was breaking up the political clubhouses. He was fighting the mob. And so Wayne covered him very closely and was, thought he was good, right? Thought he did good work. And then, of course, Giuliani became mayor, and Wayne covered those administrations really, really closely. One thing, his opinion or his assessment of Giuliani changed over time. Certainly by time he was mayor, Barrett was much more critical, very critical of him. And so the pieces in here that are about Giuliani are actually about his mayoral administration, and really about the racism of the budgets during the Rudy Giuliani days. There's a piece about after Amadou Diallo was shot and after those protests, or as that wave of civil disobedience protests were happening in spring of '99, Wayne did this great piece that's really a deep dive into not that one killing, because that one killing was getting a lot of coverage in the other papers, but he looked at the procedures and behaviors of the police department in the preceding years under Mayor Giuliani. And in a way that is really kind of classic Wayne, took in a tremendous amount of data and said how many complaints, like how have complaints risen, how have incidents of use of force risen, how have incidents of reported abuse risen, showing the things that happened before this one big, a case that got a lot of attention, Amadou Diallo, the loss of his life. And as we remember in the Rudy years, there were several of these, right? The part of the litany that we now recite, several of those names for us New Yorkers are from those years, are from the late 90s. So we have some of those stories in the book. Then we have some stories that I think are really fun. It's from before my life in New York, but they're all about the clubhouse politics of the 1980s. Koch administration stuff, which was Barrett's first book, which he co-authored with Jack Newfield, called City for Sale. And these are stories that, to me, they seem like like out of a 1970s movie. Payoffs and bathrooms and wise guys and crooks. And
I was really shocked to learn about the level of corruption in New York City and state government. Were you?
I guess not, because when I was a wee college kid, I interned with Wayne. So in a lot of ways, my introduction to New York was through Wayne's reporting, and was as part of a cohort of his interns learning the city by learning the city's crimes. It's a sort of different sort of topographical map, right? So there's certain parts of the city I would go to like, that's where that happened. Oh, that's where that payoff went. Oh, that's where somebody made this donation.
Tell me about your experience as one of Wayne's interns. What was that like?
It was the best journalism education any of us could have gotten. I mean, I happened to go to an excellent journalism school later, and that's been a helpful credential. But in working for Wayne, we got this fantastic training on the value of facts. And that's part of why we, wanted this book to come out now. I think so many people feel like we're living in this age of fog and confusion where everything is slippery. We don't know what's true and what's not. We don't know where information's coming from. And Wayne's method of journalism, the reporting he produced, was so rock solid. It was so rigorous. There was no question about whether this was true or not. And he worked hard to get that truth, right? He worked hard to get these facts. But he believed that there were such things as facts. And he also believed that there was right and wrong. And I think those two things are really important for a young journalist, for somebody thinking about this profession, to be able to be trained and inculcated in that way.
You do get a real sense of moral outrage at some of the misdeeds that he uncovered. That comes.
Yeah, absolute healthy outrage. Something was wrong. He thought that was bad, and he wasn't cynical enough to say, that's just how the game is played. he honestly believed that we deserved better, that we deserved good government. And I think that's an amazing training for young journalists or just for young citizens, right? Young members of the democracy. But then it was this is honorable work and it's worth working really hard at. So we don't just tweet out a little blog post. We'll work for 3 weeks to get a story straight, right? We'll work for 3 weeks to get like half a sentence, the right fact for that half a sentence. And that is a very important lesson, I think, to form us as how we're going to be journalists, what we value, what this is.
Wayne came from a middle-class Catholic Goldwater Republican family in Lynchburg, Virginia. What turned him into someone who was obsessed with championing the poor and the oppressed and people of color?
A few things. Really experience of the world, right? Like who we're with, who we listen to, who we spend our time with, where we plant ourselves, very much determined what we see in the world, what we believe. So he left Lynchburg. He went to St. Joe's University, a Jesuit school in Philadelphia. And by the time he left college, he had very different political beliefs than when he entered. And that education had definitely something to do with that. But then
the impact of the Jesuits, you think?
Right. Of like,
okay.
here's a rigorous way of thinking about ethics, and about responsibility to be men and women for others. But then after college and after graduate school, he lived in Brownsville, Brooklyn, worked as a teacher in a public school, and worked with people in the community to build a community newspaper. And he and his wife, Fran Barrett, were absolutely rooted in Brownsville. And that changed what they understood, right? If you're a white kid from Lynchburg in a comfortable middle-class home, you might think some things about how the world works. If you're living in Brownsville as part of a Black radical liberation movement, and these are your friends and these are the people you hang out with, you're going to see different things.
And so he actually started a community newspaper put together on a mimeograph machine that exposed some of the concerns that people of that community had about the government, whatever.
Yeah, and about landlords, about drug selling, a very crusading newspaper. And it was in running that newspaper and reporting in this Barrett way on some of the local political bosses that captured the attention of Jack Newfield, who was already a highly esteemed investigative reporter at The Voice. And so Jack kind of recruited Wayne and tutored him. So Wayne was a child of Jack's in terms of getting into the field. But he kept that perspective. He kept the outrage and the anger that he adopted in seeing injustice up close, enacted upon people he cared about. And he stayed mad about that.
Wayne spent most of his career at the Village Voice, even though, because of the quality of his reporting, he probably could have gone on to one of the bigger papers, whether it was the Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. What was it about the Village Voice that kept him there and allowed him to do such remarkable work?
The Voice was always described as a writer's newspaper, right? That the writers in a lot of ways called the shots. And so they were able to report on what they wanted to report on. They could write long when they wanted to write long. If they were going to not file every week because they were working on something big, they had some leeway to do that. Very different than being at the dailies, where you were producing often all the time. Even if you had a pretty important byline, you're producing at a rapid rate. As it is, Wayne actually did write almost every week, but he had tremendous latitude in what he focused on. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, in his goodbye essay, when he's leaving The Voice, he says that. He's like, I was recruited a couple of times, but I wanted to stay here because I had freedom here. And because they let us tell the truth, they let us write what we wanted to write.
Did he ever indicate which of his stories he was most proud of?
He wasn't an introspective guy, right? You know that. Right? I sometimes think about the number of words friends and colleagues and interns have spilt talking about Wayne when he was alive and when he's gone, and they are far more words than Wayne spent thinking about Wayne, I think. So no, he didn't. I mean, maybe he did to somebody else, but to me, no.
Was his reporting, we talked about, his early reporting on Donald Trump. Do you think that reporting about Trump was prescient about the kind of president Trump would become?
I think that's exactly the right word. Prescient, galling, right? To read it now after what we've been through for 4 years, this was all written down already, right? The particulars have changed. The particulars of which the scams are and which the influence peddling is obviously different in 2019 than it was in 1979. But the character of the man has not changed, and the methods have not changed, and the motivation has not changed. It was clear after reading that series of articles in the late winter of 1979 that this was a person driven only, that Donald Trump was a person driven only by personal greed,
self-interest, right,
and like a need for adulation. And Barrett's able to show that, really artfully in these pieces. And so you come away with a sense of the person, and that person did not grow or change in the intervening 35 years.
Tell me about a story that you've written that was influenced by what you learned from Wayne.
No, that's very lovely. I think really very many of them. It's kind of the method and approach is what I always found myself thinking about, even on deadline when I was at a daily paper in New Jersey. The rock solid commitment to make sure you've got everything right. One thing that you really know this, right? That you'll go to court for these facts, that these things are true, and that you're really making sure about your attributions. Another thing is knowing what your biases are and being extra fair to the people on the other side. And this is something I talk to my students now at Lehman College about quite a bit. I said, of course we're not objective, but our methodology should be. We should be using a scientific method to do our reporting. But we know who we like and don't like in plenty of stories, right? Some stories we don't have a personal opinion, but some who we think is the villain and who's the hero. And so you need to use that knowledge and then go the extra mile to make sure that you've given a fair shake to the person you're not, right? So I wrote a lot of landlord-tenant stories and housing finance stories right around the collapse of 2008. And I really made sure I called the landlord and the investment firm 10, 15, 20, 25 times to make sure they had every opportunity to comment. Because I knew I knew where my heart was. And so, right. And that's absolutely a Wayne thing. I remember that, getting day after day after day, call that person again. Like, they're not going to talk to us. That's all right. Make sure that you've given them every opportunity to speak. And then I think, I wrote a book that had to do with a lot of FOIL requests and digging in archives and doing research, the book before this. And that love of the hunt, that love of finding the document, of believing that there's a trail out there. And if you find the right piece of paper, it'll open up a new understanding. I carried that very much into my other book.
How did Wayne's getting laid off from the Village Voice in 2011 affect him?
It was very hard. It was very, very hard for him, right? He'd given his life to this paper. It was, the Voice was owned by many different owners over the course. Like I forget if it's his line or one of the other reporters from his era who said, sometimes we got our owners from a temp staffing agency, right? But those were particularly rotten owners. And, the sort of people they were was revealed in the fact that they laid off two of their best reporters. They said, we don't want to pay you. And
at some point, they laid off all of their name people, the people, who you're so, whether, I think Jules Pfeiffer was before, they laid him off before Wayne, and all of the people that you associated with the Village Voice eventually just got let go.
Right. It was this model of profit making that I think fundamentally didn't understand what was important about the Village Voice. It's tough to figure out how to make money in journalism. We all know. But they took the most obvious thing, like, all right, people read us for the listings or people read us for the ads and back, and seemed to think that that's all they needed to be, that the rest of it was fluff. And, it was there were some great people who worked there till the end, Neil DeMoss and some other really excellent people who did hold on to the end and gave it the good fight. But the character of those owners were revealed when they said, we're letting Wayne Barrett go. And then when Tom Robbins said, well, I'm going too. Yeah. And they said, sure.
What articles in the book would you recommend that readers go to first?
So there's there's these Trump ones we keep mentioning, but I think a really important article is from much later on. It's an article about the Deutsche Bank fire during the Bloomberg administration. And this is Barrett swimming against the stream, right? Mayor Bloomberg got really kind of glowing coverage almost until the last year of his administration. He got such a pass from the New York newspapers. And the Deutsche Bank, it's a building that was damaged in 9/11. It was a long and complicated kind of legal procedure to figure out how to demolish it and build something new there. And in, crony, corrupt backroom sort of deals that would make Meet Esposito blush, firms connected to the mayor did an absolutely horrible and irresponsible job of managing that demolition project, and 2 firefighters lost their lives. The city was very near to being brought up on criminal charges, not a wrongful death lawsuit, but criminal charges for the negligence that the city exercised, that the Bloomberg administration exercised in allowing this project to be so very poorly managed. The subcontractor that was, directly responsible for the deaths of those firefighters was a company called John Galt Company, which is the character in Atlas Shrugged, which I thought was sort of too poetic to get.
Right.
So this is the deregulated, this is the business first, this is the money before people ethic that was actually the politics of the Bloomberg administration.
That led to the death of those firefighters.
It led to the death of 2 firefighters, negligence on the part of a subcontractor who got a job because of cozy relationships with the mayor's administration.
Over the last 20 years or so, a lot of newspapers and magazines have shut down or downsized. What do you think this bodes for the future of investigative reporting?
I guess what it means is that we need to work kind of smarter, and that we need to, in addition to being gumshoes, in addition to being investigators, that we also have to be advocates and entrepreneurs for the work of investigative reporting. And I wish that wasn't the case, right? I wish we could just go do our job. But we actually need to convince the population that they need investigative reporting. And of course, there is fantastic investigative reporting happening in the country, just in fewer places. So of course, the New York Times, with these tax stories that we've read in the last few weeks, fantastic, right? Like top-notch work being done. ProPublica, Reveal. This book is a project of the Type Media Center. Type Investigations is another one of these, freestanding investigative news outlets that funds long-term projects and then publishes them, often in publishing arrangements with magazines. So whereas a generation ago, a reporter like Wayne had a salary and insurance and a paycheck week after week, now reporters like him don't. They move from grant-funded project to grant-funded project, hopefully with the backing of one of these sorts, like Type Media Center or one of these other investigative operations, working as a sort of matchmaker between the reporter and the publication. And, that means that there's a certain amount of time you got to spend writing grant applications,
right,
as opposed to
pay for your salary, right? Right. If Wayne were still around, if you're around now, what would he be writing about?
He'd be writing
probably an obvious.
Yeah, right. Like, he'd be writing about. Well, right now he'd be writing about, right, like who was trying to which pharmaceutical firm was trying to make sure that their company got to treat the president last week during his spell of COVID, right? He'd be following the documents to figure out who's paying that doctor. What affiliations does that doctor, who was so not forthright in his press conferences, who's, and even less focused than that, but who's lining up to get rich off of COVID? Because, there's plenty of people who are, right? There's plenty of firms who are circling the state and the federal and city money that is being allotted to deal with COVID and to deal with the after effects of it, just like there is after any disaster. And there's sharks lining up and lining their pockets to get that. And Wayne would be methodically, meticulously documenting who's who and who's getting this.
That would be a really interesting story. And I'm sorry he's not around to do it, but I hope that somebody else is.
That's right. It just means that all of us and all of the people we train need to do that work. What we're hoping with the book is that it is a kind of a shot in the arm to think about how valuable this journalism is. but also, frankly, how fun it is, right? Wayne was not a dour person. He wrote about heavy and dark things, but he was not dour. He enjoyed himself thoroughly. He
Right.
enjoyed the life that he led. And I think that's an important, an important message to have young journalists know that it's not all doom and gloom at all. You can vanquish wrongdoers and have a good time doing it.
Right. It's fun and rewarding.
Right, and hopefully you get a bit of that in the book, that there was a lot of pride, there was a lot of joy in this kind of work, and really a tremendous amount of love. Yeah.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank Eileen Markey, Assistant Professor of Journalism and Media Studies at Lehman College and editor of Without Compromise, the brave journalism that first exposed Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and the American Epidemic of Corruption. It's published by Bold Type Books. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.